Welcome to Authentic Living with Roxanne, a place where we have conscious conversations about things that really matter in our lives. And now here's your host, Roxanne Derhodge.
Hi everyone, it's Roxanne Derhodge with Authentic Living with Roxanne. Today I have a colleague that I met, oh my goodness, Denis, it's probably about 4 or 5 years ago now.
Something like that.
Yeah, we're both members of the Canadian Association of Professional Speakers. And Denis Boudreau, and is his title is a Chief Inclusion Officer, and he's the owner of Inclusive Communication. So, Denis, thanks so much for coming on. And I'd like to talk a little bit about inclusivity. And I know this has been something that you have been talking about well before it became, I'm going to say, a thing that most of us focused on. So tell us a little bit about your path and what got you into this kind of work, Denis.
Absolutely. So yeah, I've been interested in that topic for about 23 years now. So I guess a little bit before it became a thing, a trend. I stumbled into this by accident as a web developer back then. I was responsible for leading a team developing websites for different organizations back in Montreal, where I live. And one day, one of our project managers came to me and said, "We won this project to redesign a particular website for one of the hospitals in Montreal. One of their requirements is that the site be accessible to people who are blind. Figure this out." Like, what? Really? So I'd never heard of blind people wanting to use be even thinking of using the internet. To me, the web was a very visual medium. So I started researching about that and discovered that there was all these possibilities in terms of how you would develop a website so that it would be usable by people who were blind, people who had different types of disabilities. And I really got passionate about that particular challenge because to me, it was all about challenges initially. And over the years, I just developed a very profound attachment, passion for that particular mission, which is making the digital space a more equitable, just, accessible, inclusive space for people who have disabilities. And that grew into also considering the needs of people who are aging, people who are marginalized by technology one way or another. And that led me into building a business around this idea of helping organizations provide more inclusive communications, like use better channels, more inclusive channels, so that when they are communicating with their people, with their prospects, their customers, for instance, where they're talking internally to their teams, their workforce, that they do that in a way that is inclusive and that no one feels left out. So it's been a 22, 23-year long journey of just helping people understand that there's an actual market around disability, that disability inclusion is the smart thing to do. If you have a business, if you're in a business, that it's a great way to make sure that you hit your goals, that you cover your bottom line. All these different things is like building awareness around these topics so that organizations can be more successful, reaching a broader, largely untapped market with folks that are typically just not considered in the first place.
It's so funny, right? Because you don't think about inclusivity until you're in it, right? So, for instance, when my son played hockey, my mom had a stroke, and so we would try to get her into the rinks, for instance. Not having thought about it, because unless you're in it, Denis, I don't know if and it's interesting. I want to hear your perspective. Is you don't start to think along those lines. So what started to happen to me is every rink that I went to before we would get her out of the car and figure out, is there an elevator, first of all? And it's shocking how many, places didn't have elevators. And those steps, you don't even think about it in a hockey rink. Yeah. How many steps there are, to be able to get her up steps. So somebody like me hadn't thought about that before. So I just think about the evolution that you may have seen, and I want to talk a little bit about that. In 23 years ago, like you said, like it was like if someone's not able to see, what kind of things you'd have to do to build in. What were some of the needs that you started to see 23 years ago? And let's talk a little bit about coming up to the present, about where we are, and even maybe potentially kind of some of the gaps that you're still seeing.
Of course. I mean, I want to start by talking a little bit about that experience that you had with OcuRings, for instance. I've had very similar experiences with friends who are in wheelchairs and just trying to find a restaurant in downtown Montreal. I mean, it's not perfect today still. You still have a lot of restaurants that are just not that accessible, but it got a lot better than it did 20 years ago. And I remember one particular evening after a meetup that we had in Montreal, here in downtown Montreal, just trying to find a restaurant and, hitting every place that we could find around the area where we were, and none of them having a ramp. And a lot of them didn't have a huge, barrier. Maybe it's 1 or 2 steps, but that's all it needs to prevent someone from getting in. Or sometimes you would be able to get into the restaurant, and then you realize that, the bathroom is on a different floor and you have stairs to get there. So the place is technically accessible, you can reach it, but once you're inside, you can't really navigate around the tables because it's too narrow, or you can't get to the restrooms or this or that. So those are like, you're completely right. When you start paying attention to these details, they jump at you from everywhere. Like they're all over the place. So yeah, things that I've seen, most of my activity is really related to digital, so web and internet in general. I've seen a lot of improvements over the years. Most of them having to do with the fact that there's a lot of different laws that were adopted over the years that force organizations to be more inclusive, to pay attention to international standards, to make sure that they comply with different sets of guidelines so that their content is not exclusionary of people with disabilities or anyone who's marginalized by technology again. It goes from the ability to put content online, say in a PDF document, and not having thought of someone being able to, or wanting to use that document, and the document not being compatible with the tools that they're using. For instance, if you think about someone who's blind, for instance, it becomes self-evident when you start thinking about it, but the idea of using a mouse to point and click on a monitor is pretty useless for someone who can't see. So what's your fallback? And to someone who's blind, using their keyboard is their fallback. So they're going to learn how their keyboard works. They're going to know where the keys are much better than you and I ever will. I mean, that's how they interface with the content, and they're going to use that keyboard to navigate in lieu of a mouse, for instance. So, and the way that they're going to get the information on the screen is they're going to have a piece of software that will either read the information back to them, or they're going to have a different type of keyboard that basically is a braille display. So it will convert the information that's on the screen into braille, and they can read the information with their fingers. So, and that's just one example out of many of how people with disabilities are going to work around the challenges that they face so that they can still access content. So over the years, we've seen that a lot of the content online, a lot of the ways in which developers, designers, content creators are putting content together has evolved from a technological standpoint, in terms of complexity, in terms of all these different things that we've seen. Anyone who has paid attention to how design has evolved over the last 20 years knows that it's become more and more interactive, more and more visual, and less just text-based. So through the years, as these different technologies were coming together, as video became a thing, for instance, for a long time, these videos were not automatically captioned. So someone who has deaf or hard of hearing had a much harder time to follow along. At some point, it became more of a thing that people were doing, and now it's pretty much a given in most cases that there's going to be at least some kind of captioning happening or transcript happening for a podcast episode, for instance, that sort of thing. And in all areas, basically, we've seen these improvements, never to a point where things are perfect, but it's definitely easier, and it gets easier over the years because technology allows for a lot of these things to be handled a bit more easily than they used to be.
So let's talk a little bit about, the marketplace, right? For people
Mhm.
that are inclusive versus not.
Okay.
And for, employers, thinking of our interfaces, you and I are speaking here, but when people go to purchase any service, they're generally going to a website, right? What are some of the fundamental things that you in your frame, because I know you're going to look at it completely different potentially from me, who doesn't have those eyes for kind of digitizing and inclusivity. What are some of the basic things that we should be looking for as a consumer if we're looking for inclusivity, if we go to a website?
Well, one of the most basic things, I'm going to go back to what I just said. So the ability to use a website without your mouse, being able to just use your keyboard. A lot of people, they're kind of power users of their keyboard. Instead of pointing and clicking on different things and spending all that time moving from one target to another, they might use their tab key, and then they're just going to use tab, 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 and then go through all the active elements of their page that way. So one of the key foundational pieces to see if a website is accessible is, can you use the entire website? Can you do all these things that are available to you? Can you use all those features without requiring the use of your mouse? Can you achieve all of those things using just your keyboard, your tab key, your return key, your space bar, your escape key, the arrow keys on the bottom right corner? Like if you can use those controls and still use the site 100%, that's a really good indication that the site is accessible. Someone like me, I'm colorblind. So, I experience a lot of frustrations or barriers regularly with the use of color on websites. If colors are being used as a way to convey information and there's no other way to get a sense of what that information is, I miss out on some of the content. I miss out on some cues, for instance. I may miss an error message if it's a dark red against dark gray text. Like I might not even notice it in the first place. Most people wouldn't think about that. But for the 10% of us who are colorblind, that's the thing. So there's all these different things that you can look into in terms of how colors are being leveraged, how you can use your content without that mouse, how logical the ordering of the content is, how technical the actual copy is. Some of the things that we pay attention to in my field is the complexity of the copy itself. And most people who create copy online are people who have postgraduate degrees. They have university degrees, like they're very well educated. They have a really high level of literacy, and half the population has an average reading level that's around fourth or fifth. Ninth or 10th grade if you convert it to the English system, not the French Canadian one. But so the equivalent of about 13, 14, 15-year-old is what most people have. Like more than half of the population that's where they're at. So there's a huge disconnect oftentimes between people who write content and people who consume content. So people like me, what we do is we work with organizations who have a tendency to over complexify what they're writing and bringing it to a level that is better understood by the majority of people. So connecting through content that way, connecting through visuals, images, for instance, making sure that if you have those images that convey information, that we are going to provide a file back again, a different modality to get to the content of those images, so that someone, again, who's blind, for instance, when they get to an image with their screen readers, instead of just hearing image and not really knowing what it's about, that they hear a description of what the graphic is so that they can tell what that's about and still understand, the content that's being conveyed through visual, like a visual component as opposed to just text, and a bunch of other things like that. But it's about making things simpler to use. It's about making things more perceivable, more operable, more understandable from a person's perspective, and from their tools. It's to make sure that the content is more robust and that it works really well with the tools that they use, so that all these different technologies work together and can actually convey something back to them in a way that will make sense. So it's technical. A lot of it is technical, and we do this work with designers, developers, and other web professionals, tweaking the message that an organization wants to send, like the brand wants to convey, in a way that will be usable by more than just your typical average user, as we like to think of them.
What's interesting, to my point about until I had a need, I didn't think about it. So I think, and now you're making me think about my website, because I'm like thinking, is it accessible? And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, Denis, I have to talk to you, because I'm just thinking of an image. And I know, like, captions, I love it now because sometimes I don't want to hear the sound. And I actually just, I actually turn off the sound and read the captions, because I think I don't want to hear something because I'm tired. I might, I might much prefer to read the words and watch the person. So it's interesting, right? Based on kind of how we're having different options. It may not have been something that I would have even considered before, but now I might say, oh, I'm going to watch this interview with Roxanne and Denis, but I'm just going to, read the captions and watch them instead of listening. So it's
Yeah,
giving,
absolutely.
other people that are maybe able-bodied, potentially, I think from my perspective with mental resilience, or us using our capacities to detriment on being online, what, the different ways that we might be accessing the information, even though we have the capacity, but we want a different interface based on some of the things that you're talking around senses, sight, sound, taste, touch, smell, and being able to adapt, to say, I'm going to try this. I like Audible, for instance, because I can just listen. So,
Right.
because I'm reading all day, and if I want to hear something and I think, oh, I wouldn't mind reading, the last thing I want to do is use my eyes. So I will listen to a
Fair
lot
enough.
more books, so I think just from inclusivity, it's probably also allowing other people to consume data or information in a different way.
It absolutely is. So I'll give you a couple of examples of that. Most technologies that you and I use on our phones today come from a need that needed to be addressed for a disability standpoint to begin with. Like every day, I'm sure you use your phone and you magnify things on your phone by doing that little pinch to zoom gesture. That was never built for you and I. That was built for someone who had a low vision impairment and just couldn't see. So, you can zoom in and read better. It became something that everybody adopted for obvious reasons, much in the same way that auto completion, whether we love that feature or not, and however, accurate that feature is, it was not initially built to help us be more efficient. And when we're typing, it was meant for someone who had difficulty with using their hands to type, for instance, to help them get more efficient. And it became something that everybody adopted. Captions are the same way. Captions were there initially to help someone who had a hearing deficiency, disability, impairment, or whatnot, or someone who was completely deaf. And it became something that obviously a lot of people are using today. There's a lot more people leveraging captions on Netflix that have no hearing impairments, but they're watching Netflix while their spouse is sleeping next to them, or their kids are sleeping, or in a noisy environment and don't want to be disturbing to other people, that sort of thing. In a gym, in an airport, like wherever we consume captions, everybody adopts this and it becomes mainstream. But it all started from this idea of, okay, so how do we address this particular challenge that some people have so that they can participate? And a lot of what I do, a lot of what people like me do, relates to exactly that. It's taking those technologies and then making them more mainstream so that they become part of our, day-to-day use, and we take them for granted. But for some people, they're more than just a convenience; they're a necessity if they want to participate.
So when you look at that, because I think I know I've hit the voice activation on my iPhone, and then trying to figure out how to turn it off was my dilemma. Today I'm like, it's telling me stuff, and I'm like, what did I touch? But really, from a perspective, these got developed for to give people capacity based on the whatever they're needing. I think that's phenomenal that that's been possible. Now, I want you to talk a little bit about the concept of what are we missing in the marketplace if we're not being accessible, like with,
it's a big topic.
because I think you have so many employees that need inclusivity for lots of different ways. What are employers or companies missing if they're not thinking through things from the perspective of inclusivity?
So the first thing I want to tell you and all the listeners is that people with disabilities are a much more prevalent group than we realize. Most of us might know a person or two that we identify as having a disability, but most of us are, I mean, the majority of us, if not all of us, are unaware of all the folks around us who actually have disabilities. In Canada, for instance, it's 22% of the population that self-identifies as having at least one disability. If you're thinking United States, it's 26%. So we're somewhere between 1 to 4 to 1 to 5, 1 out of 5 of the population self-identifying as such. The thing is, the reason why we don't notice those people that much is that 80% of those disabilities are invisible. And what I mean by that is, learning disabilities, ADHD, for instance. I mean, dyslexia, for instance, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, everything around neurodiversity, ADHD, the autism spectrum, traumatic brain injuries, like all these different things that exist that are not necessarily visible. Color blindness, again, here is another example of that. Anxiety issues, mental health issues, like all those things will fit into this general category of situations that can be quite disabling for some people, but you can't really tell. The way that you can tell someone being blind or someone being in a wheelchair, for instance, someone being deaf, it becomes pretty obvious pretty quickly. But some of these other things like ADHD, you might never really know. So, but all those folks are going to experience the same web that we do in a very different way based on their challenges. For some people, it's going to be about the ability to see what's there. For some other people, it's going to be whether they can hear it or not. And in some other cases, it's going to be whether they can process the information or not. But that 22 to 26% of the population in North America, let's say Canada and US, this group has a very significant purchasing power as well. In Canada alone, if you look at the information based on the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, it's $55 billion a year in after-tax disposable income. That's 55 billion with a B as in banana, right?
Wow.
So 55 billion in Canada alone per year. If you look at the United States, it's 504 billion a year. So $500 billion a year is what they control. If as a business you are not paying attention to inclusivity, if you're not paying attention to accessibility, you're basically cutting yourself out of that potential market, because those folks, if they can't use your services, they're going to go elsewhere to someone who actually pays attention to that. So it is by far the largest untapped and underserved market that we have, that we're not even aware that we have. And that's one of the reasons why there's so many laws and regulations around these questions, because it's a very large group of people. And as we become more and more, embedded into the digital space for services and products and everything, you create a pretty significant chasm between some population and some others, and people are left behind. But when you look at, and the thing is also, because we're talking about the market here, if we just look at Canada, for instance, like I said, 55 billion a year, not insignificant. And but that's just people with disabilities. And the data that I'm sharing with you, that 22% for Canada, for instance, that's the working age population in general. We're not even considering people that are getting older, our seniors, for instance, people who have spent the last 30 years with technology, that eventually retire. They don't stop using technology all of a sudden. They still use technology, but they've also gathered, wealth over their lifetime, and they have money to spend, and they have time to spend it, and they have grandkids to spoil, and have all these different things. Where are they going to spend their money? Online? Are they going to be spending it with you or somebody else? Probably somebody else if your site is not accessible to them. As we get older, all these things that we identify from a disability standpoint become more and more relevant for someone who's just getting older. And I'm 51, arguably pretty young still, though I don't feel that way every single day. But I know that my sight, my hearing, my ability to maintain concentration for a long time, all those things are not as great as they used to be just 5 or 10 years ago. I have no idea what that's going to look like when I'm 65, but it's probably not going to be better than today. So I'm on a path where all my senses are slowly deteriorating that way. And I recognize a lot of the early signs of other things that, at some point I may need that kind of accommodation to be able to successfully do what I'm doing. So on top of this data that I shared with you, you've got all the data that relates to, our seniors, their prevalence in terms of a demographic, around 18-19%. Again, in the US and Canada, somewhere around there is what we have for 65-year-olds and older. And then what they control is much higher than what people with disabilities control. So again, that's another market. And when you look at what people call the disability market, which is basically folks with disabilities and those who care about them, people who could be swayed one way or another to go do business with your company or somebody else's company because of the way that their friend or their loved ones were treated or felt, they could be swayed to go in a different direction and not go to you because you failed to service people that they care about. And we live in a world now where inclusion, diversity, equity, all these values are much more present in people's minds. And the data shows that 77% of people are likely to choose an organization that is more inclined towards DEI. And as a result of that, if you are identified as not being that way, then again, you lose opportunities. So even if it wasn't for from a societal standpoint, like wanting to do the right thing as a business, from a business standpoint, there are so many incentives to pay attention to those things and just open up to a new market.
Right, because you never want to think, that you're trying to exclude anybody, right? Intentionally. I mean, unintentionally, clearly, Denis, I would say that a lot of companies do that. But,
Yes.
with all this capacity now, with digitization across the board, and of course, we know that's just going to get more and more in business, it even becomes more important from not just from, like you said, from doing the right thing, but really fiscally from a business perspective, it makes sense that you start to consider this. Now,
Right.
I'd like to talk about your book. Denis has
Sure.
just released an amazing book, which Denis, I want you to tell everybody about the book, because this is all information that I think is valuable, and we all need to be able to read this and start thinking about it in our business. So tell us a little bit about the book, and what you think some of the nuggets are in reference to why people should go out and buy the book.
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity. Well, the book is titled The Inclusive Speaker. Speaker in the sense of professional who speaks in front of a group. In some cases, like you and I, it's professional speakers talking to an audience. In other cases, it might be, a business leader talking to their teams in a meeting room, or it can be a salesperson making a pitch in front of a bunch of prospects and trying to convert them into clients. Like anyone who speaks with other people and monetizes that activity is who that target audience is. So the book is titled The Inclusive Speaker: How to Truly Connect with All of Your Audience Without Leaving Anyone Behind. So it's pretty telling what the book is about just by that title, hopefully. In the book, I'm basically making the case that I very briefly mentioned, made up with you now, in terms of the market and all these different opportunities. It's about helping people understand how much money they're leaving on the table every year by not paying attention to inclusion as much as they should or could. It's about showing and teaching people different tips and tricks so that they can change their approach when they're communicating to an audience, so that no one feels left out, so that no one feels disengaged, feels like they're not welcomed into that conversation. So it's like I'm using it from an approach of different types of disabilities. The book introduces 8 different personas or characters, if you will, that have different types of disabilities that are in different situations, attending, live events, for instance, or meetings in a boardroom, that sort of thing, and the kind of challenges or barriers that they run into, and how we as speakers could have avoided those barriers by just doing things a little different, by accounting for a particular consideration, this or that. And so there's over like 200, I lost count really, like over 200 different tips and tricks like that to pay attention to become more inclusive as a communication professional. And then the book leads into a model that I'm proposing to people to go down that path of becoming more inclusive. Like how and what can you do to take stock of where you are today in terms of how you deliver, how you share information, the words that you use, the techniques that you use, and learn to adapt and add more to your toolkit, so that when you speak in front of a group, everyone feels compelled to come in with that conversation with you, because they feel like you see them, that you welcome them as well. In a nutshell, that's what that is. There's a ton of different tools in there to help you, again, like self-assess where you are and help you understand how to get to the next level. And hopefully through that, people can go down that particular path and become consciously more and more inclusive, knowing and understanding why they do it and the benefits that come from doing that towards reaching a broader audience.
That's amazing. So I think something that we all can learn from. So let's say you're talking to a CEO, and I want you to think, there's going to be some senior level people or CEOs listening. And what are some of the top, say, 1 or 2 tips that you can tell them or could tell them to consider about being more of an inclusive speaker that maybe they could walk away and reflect on, and then potentially go on and if they wanted to learn more, buy the book?
There's so many things that CEOs can do, that senior executives can do, really, to create a culture of inclusion in their organization. It begins by embodying the message yourself. You have to provide people with the buy-in that they need so that they can feel that this is worth their time, that they're not going to be discarded if they try these different things. So speaking to the value of inclusion in your organization, educating yourself really about the benefits of having a diverse workforce, and the benefits of being able to draw from different perspectives. If everybody in your company kind of looks the same, everybody kind of thinks the same way, it diminishes your ability to innovate, to be creative. If you have people that have very diverse perspectives, whether it's because of their gender, because of their race, because of where they come from, because of cultural differences, because of disability, people come in with their own experiences. And when you put all that together, you get a much more diverse, creative workforce, and you can benefit from that. So one of the ways in which CEOs can really impact that piece is making sure that you are in an organization that favors hiring diversity, that you make sure that people who are like checking that box of diversity are not just tokens for you, but they're really put in a position where they influence your company. They are getting the same opportunity as others to grow into the business and influence the business in their own way themselves, so that others can see that they're doing that, so that they can understand that they too could eventually grow into this position and transform your culture, with everyone contributing to a broader, more diverse perspective. So it really begins with sharing the message about this is something that we value. And of course, why not explain why that is? I mean, part of it, of course, is going to be, yes, we want to do the right thing, but it's totally okay to say, there's a huge market, huge opportunity that we could tap into if only we were doing that as well. And start with something like this. I mean, it's pretty simple to begin with. Allow people to create, resource groups internally where people can gather and talk about these ideas. If you don't have a diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative already, start putting one together. Like, task someone to be responsible for creating a DEI initiative internally, so that people feel that they belong in your business, that they're seen, they're respected, they're valued, and see where that leads you. I mean, it can only lead you down a very positive path ultimately.
Yes, and I think to your point, it's if you are the role model to say, if I don't know within my employee base what that translates out to, right? Like, how many people are visually impaired? How many people have deficits in hearing? How many people have neurodiversity needs? How many people are from different culture, racially they're different, orientation they're different? That's, to me, is a beginning step to say, okay, we need to be able to have, like you said, these ERGs where we start to discuss the implications for whatever industry you're in, starting there to show that you are willing to stand behind this.
Right.
I think is an amazing beginning point. Now, Denis, this has been amazing. Where can people reach you, and where can they buy the book? Please let them know. We will also have a link with the podcast, but let them know where they can get a hold of you.
Sure. So the book can be easily found on my website. So inclusive.ca. So that's inclusiv.ca/books. Simple enough. There's a dedicated page to the Inclusive Speaker book. It will lead you to Amazon. You can easily get a Kindle copy. I soft launched last Thursday. That was the 16th of March. So until the 1st of April, it's $1.99. So I mean, it's not that expensive really to get the Kindle copy. The book will get to regular price as of April 1st, and the paperback is coming out any day now. We're still working on last couple of details with the publisher for design, but any day now the paperback will be available as well. So inclusive.ca/books is where you can find all the information about that book, and incidentally about me as well.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for your time. So what am I walking away with? Like, I think Denis has blown my mind when I think about in Canada, 54 million and
55 billion.
Billion, sorry. And in the US, 560?
4 billion.
504.
Yeah. If you combine US and Canada together, basically you're talking about 555 billion, 554
Wow.
billion
Well,
dollars.
you've educated me on it. It's if we're missing the boat on this, as in company owners, we're really missing. And again, it's the good thing to do, but other than that, it makes such business sense.
Yeah, definitely.
So the call to action is to look and see who's around you, how are you addressing it, and what steps are you willing to take to start ensuring that you have and become a DEI model for the company that you lead. So for everyone, thanks so much. Denis, thanks so much for your time. Everyone, if you're needing more on me and you wanted to know more about how you lead as a leader on authenticity, go to roxannederhodge.com/quiz, 1Z, and you can do a quick assessment and we'll send you off the results. Again, Denis, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you
and
for having me.
I look forward to connecting, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Authentic Living with Roxanne, creating the space for positive, healthy change. Roxanne is a keynote speaker, psychotherapist, and coach. To work with Roxanne, visit roxannederhodge.com/blueprint. We'll see you next time on Authentic Living with Roxanne.